Like he's really talking about if his woman goes out for the night, he find her, whatever, he might forgive her, but boom, boom, I'm gonna knock her out. And I was like, whoa.
Did you know Little Walter changed blues music forever? He was not just a harmonica player, he was a genius. But why don't people talk about his life struggles? What really happened to him behind the scenes?
What flesh is to bone, what sorrow is to a tear, what touch is to someone alone, what bravery is to fear, Little Walter is to the blues.
How did he go from fame to a tragic end? There are many things people never told you about Little Walter. Let's uncover the truth about his life and career.
Oh yes, I know you love me. You don't do nothing.
Little Walter was one of the most important musicians in blues history. He was born with the name Marion Walter Jacobs in Louisiana. As a child, he fell in love with music and wanted to play the harmonica. He left school when he was just 12 years old and started traveling around the country. He played music wherever he could, hoping to make a name for himself. At that time, blues bands were loud, with heavy guitars and strong drum beats. Walter's harmonica sound was often lost in the noise. This frustrated him, and he wanted people to hear his music clearly. To fix this problem, he came up with a smart idea. He started using a microphone to make his harmonica sound louder. This was a big deal because no one else was doing it at the time. Today, musicians use microphones and amplifiers all the time, but back then, it was new. Walter also discovered that when he played his harmonica through an amplifier, it made a rough, distorted sound. This sound gave his music a powerful and exciting feel. Many people believe he was the first person to use distortion in music. This idea later became very popular in rock and roll. In 1952, Little Walter recorded a song called "Juke." This song became a huge success. It reached #1 on the Billboard R&B charts, making history. Even today, "Juke" is the only harmonica instrumental song to ever reach the top of the charts. Walter's unique way of playing made him different from everyone else. He changed the way people thought about the harmonica. Before him, the harmonica was often just a small part of a band. But Walter made it the main attraction. He played the harmonica in a way that sounded like a saxophone, bending notes and adding effects. People often called him a harp player. This does not mean he played a big wooden harp with strings. In blues music, harp is just another word for a harmonica. Some people also called the harmonica a comb, but harp was the most common name. The harmonica was first brought to America by German immigrants in the 1800s. Many of them played music in theaters and street shows. But it was in the South, especially in blues music, where the harmonica became an important instrument.
He was sort of the Eric Clapton or Jeff Beck, the job they would serve in the Yardbirds. Walter was the Flash.
Walter moved to Chicago in the 1940s and played with famous blues musician Muddy Waters. He was part of Muddy Waters' band for a few years and became well known in the music world. But when "Juke" became a hit, Walter decided to leave the band. He wanted to be his own boss and make his own music. He started his own band and became a big star in the blues scene. But success changed him. He became difficult to work with, and many people said he had a bad attitude. He often argued with other musicians and had problems with money. His guitarist, Louis Myers, accused him of taking more money than he should have.
He did the killer solos,
Walter also had a big problem with drinking. He was known for drinking too much alcohol, and it affected his career. In 1954, he recorded a song called "Sloppy Drunk," where he openly sang about his love for drinking. The lyrics talked about how he would rather be drunk than do anything else. His drinking and bad temper got him into trouble many times. In 1958, after a night of drinking, a woman shot him in the leg. He survived, but he had a limp for the rest of his life.
He was sort of that archetype rock and roller. You know, he was the one getting in fights, and obviously a song from the heart. You know what I mean?
In the late 1950s, rock and roll music became popular, and blues music started to fade. Walter was unhappy about this because it meant fewer people were buying blues records. Some of his old friends, including Muddy Waters, said that Walter had changed. Muddy Waters even once said that Walter was dead 10 years before he died. It meant that Walter had lost his way long before his actual death. Even though he was still talented, his bad habits and drinking made it hard for him to stay on top. Despite his struggles, he was still admired by some of the biggest musicians in the world. The Rolling Stones, one of the biggest rock bands ever, invited him to tour with them in England. He did well in Europe, but back home in Chicago, it was a different story. Many musicians refused to play with him because they thought he was too difficult. Some people also said that his voice was no longer as strong as it used to be. When Walter got to Chicago in 1945, he was just 14 years old. He needed to make money to survive, so he got a job doing laundry. But playing his harmonica on street corners made him more money than working a regular job. One of the best places for musicians at that time was Maxwell Street. That's where all the blues players would go to perform. Walter also started learning how to play the guitar to make extra money. In Chicago, Walter met some famous blues musicians. He met Big Bill Broonzy and Tampa Red, who were already well known at that time. He even got the chance to record a song when he was around 16 years old. He released a song called I Just Keep Loving Her under the name Little Walter J. It was just a small record, but it was a big step for him.
'Cause I just keep loving, I don't know the reason why.
When Walter turned 17, he met Muddy Waters. At that time, Muddy was much older than him, about twice his age. Muddy had also started as a harmonica player before switching to guitar. He was influenced by Son House and Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson was a blues legend, and some people believed he sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads to become great at playing the guitar. Muddy Waters had left Mississippi in his late 20s and moved to Chicago, just like Walter. He started a band, but some members quit. That's when his guitarist, Jimmy Rogers, introduced Walter to him. Jimmy had already seen how talented Walter was back in Arkansas. When Muddy heard him play, he knew he was special and brought him into his band, the Headhunters. Muddy later met Leonard Chess and Phil Chess, who owned a club. They signed him to a small record label called Aristocrat Records. Later, the Chess brothers bought the label and changed the name to Chess Records. Muddy was their first big artist. One of the first songs Muddy and Walter recorded together was Blue Baby.
Somebody sure gonna bury me.
They also recorded I Want My Baby.
Well, 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 I want my...
Muddy kept getting more famous with songs like I Can't Be Satisfied, I Feel Like Going Home, and Rolling Stone. That last song became one of his biggest hits. He also had other famous songs like Hoochie Coochie Man, I Just Want to Make Love to You, and I'm Ready. As Walter played with Muddy's band, he got even better on the harmonica. He learned new tricks from Big Walter Horton, also known as Shaky Horton. Some people said Big Walter was the best harmonica player of all time. He helped Walter improve and become even greater. Muddy's band included Little Walter on harmonica, Jimmy Rogers on guitar, Big Crawford on bass, and Babyface on drums. Together, they helped create what people now call the Chicago blues sound. Muddy Waters became one of the biggest blues artists ever, and Little Walter became one of the greatest harmonica players in history.
He was sort of that archetype rock and roller. You know, he was the one getting in fights, and obviously a song from the heart. You know what I mean?
Little Walter was also close to Muddy Waters. They had a falling out over money, and for a while, they didn't speak to each other. But as time passed, they made up and started working together again. Muddy Waters needed Little Walter's famous harmonica sound for his music. That sound was what made many of Muddy's songs so special. Little Walter also played harmonica on Howlin' Wolf's hit song, Smokestack Lightning. That's one of the best blues songs ever. Howlin' Wolf had his own wild personality. He was a big man, about 6'6", weighing 300 pounds. You didn't want to mess with him. There was a time when Little Walter and Howlin' Wolf almost got into a fight. The story goes that Howlin' Wolf was dating the baby mama of one of Little Walter's band members. This caused some drama, and things got heated. Howlin' Wolf even pulled out a gun. Little Walter had to jump off stage and pull out his gun too. It could have turned into something bad, but in the end, they squashed their beef and moved on. That was the kind of life Little Walter lived. Always in some kind of trouble. But trouble started following Little Walter more and more. He had a lot of bad luck. He got into several car accidents. He barely escaped from a few fires. He started getting into fights in the streets and had run-ins with the law. The fame and fortune were more than he could handle. He wasn't prepared for that kind of life. One thing people didn't know about him was that he had a bad temper. He was quick to get mad and didn't back down from a fight. He was Creole, and when he got really angry, he would start speaking French. That was his way of letting people know he was serious.
It's like he's really talking about if his woman goes out for the night, he find her, whatever, he might forgive her, but boom, boom, I'ma knock her out. And I was like, whoa.
His temper made it hard for him to keep a band together. His musicians kept quitting on him. He would hire new ones, but they always left after a while. They felt he wasn't fair with money. He didn't know how to manage his business properly. This caused even more problems for him. He also had a lot of issues with women. He liked older women, sometimes 20 years older than him, but these relationships didn't always end well. One time, a woman he was dating had a jealous boyfriend. The boyfriend tried to fight Little Walter, but Walter pulled out a knife and cut the man across his mouth. That was the kind of trouble he kept getting into. Another time, a woman hit him with a wine bottle. She smashed it across his face. If you look at some old pictures of Little Walter, you can see the scars. He had a lot of them. He got into fights with angry husbands and boyfriends because he was seeing their women behind their backs. People would throw bricks at his car and break the windows of his Cadillacs. His drinking made things even worse. Also, people used to copy the way he walked because he had a smooth and confident style. But later in life, his walk changed. He started walking funny, almost like he had a limp. Some folks said it was because he had slipped on some ice and broke his leg while he was drunk. But others said that wasn't the real reason. One of his women even shot him in the leg. That injury changed his life forever. He was left with a limp and had to walk differently. After that, he became very depressed. The pain and the way people treated him started to wear him down. He wasn't the same person anymore. The wild, energetic musician that people once loved was now struggling with his demons.
Like hip-hop, early electric blues reflected the mood of the black ghetto of the neighborhood, the problems. There weren't psychiatrists or psychologists for black people.
There was another story about his leg. One time, he got into an argument with his sister's boyfriend. Now, everybody knew Walter always carried a gun. So when they started arguing, the boyfriend thought Walter was about to pull the gun out of his jacket. In a panic, the boyfriend grabbed Walter's hand. The gun went off by accident, and Walter ended up shooting himself right in the kneecap, on the same leg that was already messed up. You would think after something like that, Walter would go straight to the hospital, right? But no, he didn't. His friends had to carry him upstairs to his house because his leg was so bad he couldn't walk properly. Even when he got drunk, it became even harder for him to move around. But instead of getting help, he just kept living his life as if nothing happened. Now, Walter himself had a different story. In an interview, someone asked him why he walked funny and what had happened to his leg. Walter just laughed and said, "I was at a woman's house and her husband came home early. I had to jump out of the window." Wow, can you believe that? Little Walter was really living a wild life.
Which is crazy. But also it showed you how crazy little Walter was.
He wasn't just wild in the streets, He was also very protective of his family. One time, his other sister's boyfriend put his hands on her. Walter wasn't having that. He took out a knife and cut the guy on the neck. He didn't play when it came to his family. He made sure nobody messed with them. But the truth is, Walter was always getting into trouble. He was constantly fighting people, going in and out of jail, and even ending up in the hospital because of all the drama. He got cut, robbed, shot, and even beaten up by the police. Some people believed it was because he made a lot of enemies. Others thought it was because he showed off too much, making himself an easy target. Walter also loved to show off his guns. He carried them everywhere, but his behavior got even worse when he started drinking heavily and using drugs. He loved drinking moonshine, strong homemade liquor, and later he started using heroin. That's when things really started going downhill. Now, some people said Walter wasn't a great fighter, but don't get it wrong. He still beat up a lot of people. The problem was, when he got drunk, he acted extra tough and picked fights he didn't need to. One crazy thing happened in Chicago. Some guys had blocked the street with their cars, and Walter wasn't having it. He went to his trunk, grabbed a tire iron, and told them to move their cars. Instead of backing down, they took the tire iron from him and beat him nearly to death with it. The beating was so bad that his head swelled up. The doctors told him to rest and not play his harmonica because it could make the damage worse. But Walter didn't listen. He still went on stage that night.
Oh, yes, I know you love me, but you don't do.
That wasn't the only time he got beat up. One time, Chicago cops caught him and beat him so badly with nightsticks that they split his head open. They left him bleeding inside his car, just lying there. It was a brutal attack. The doctors told him that his body was permanently damaged, and if he ever took another beating like that, it could be the end for him. But Walter didn't stop getting into trouble. He took more beatings from the police. He got robbed. He got into fights, and his body just kept getting weaker. He had so many injuries, but he never seemed to slow down. The mysterious death of little Walter. One night, after performing in Chicago, little Walter decided to take a break. While he was resting, a fight broke out in the place where he had been playing. Somehow, he got caught in the middle of it and was hit on the head. Afterward, he complained of a headache and went to bed. Sadly, he never woke up again. He was only 37 years old. Doctors later said he died from a heart problem. His death certificate said he had a heart attack, which happens when blood flow to the heart is blocked. Some people believe the head injury from the fight made things worse, but police, who might not have known about the fight, said he died of natural causes. This left many people wondering what really happened to him. Now let's talk about his personal life. Officially, he only had one child. But musicians who were with him on the road said women showed up all the time with babies claiming to be his. But Walter said he couldn't have kids. Doctors told him he was sterile because of a disease he got when he was younger. But there's a woman named Marian Diaz Rico, and the court ruled that she was his daughter. That was a big fight in court. His family didn't believe it, and they tried to stop it, but they lost. His estate, worth millions, went to her. The family even tried to dig up his body for DNA testing, but that didn't go through. Man, that's some drama. In 1995, his song Juke was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's one of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. His album, The Best of Little Walter, was ranked one of the greatest albums of all time. He even got a Grammy Hall of Fame award in 2008. That same year, the movie Cadillac Records came out. Columbus Short played Little Walter. Man, he did a great job. He should have won an Oscar for that role. Beyoncé played Etta James, and she won a Grammy for her version of At Last. Little Walter's music continued to inspire others, even after his death. The Rolling Stones were one of the many bands that looked up to him. In fact, they named one of their blues albums after a song by Little Walter. Keith Richards, the famous guitarist from the band, once said that Little Walter had a huge influence on them, especially because of his work with Muddy Waters. Even though Little Walter died young, his music still lives on. He changed the way people played the harmonica, and his blues songs are still loved today. His life was short, but his impact on music will never be forgotten.
What flesh is to bone, what sorrow is to a tear, what touch is to someone alone, what bravery is to fear, Little Walter is to the blues.
Little Walter would always be one of the most important musicians in blues history. He changed the way people played the harmonica. Before him, the harmonica was a simple instrument, but he made it sound powerful and exciting by using an amplifier. This made the sound louder and gave it a new electric feel. People had never heard anything like it before. Because of this, music journalist Bill Dahl called him the king of all post-war blues harpists. His style was fresh, unique, and full of energy. Many blues historians say that Little Walter created the way modern harmonica players play today. He influenced many famous musicians who came after him. His music was studied by artists like Junior Wells, James Cotton, and George Harmonica Smith. Others, like Carrie Bell and Paul Butterfield, also learned from his style. Even rock musicians like Brian Jones and Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones were inspired by him. His impact was huge, and his techniques are still used by harmonica players all over the world. Little Walter's talent was undeniable, but his life was not easy. He had a troubled personal life, and many problems followed him throughout his years. Fame and success did not bring him peace. He had struggles with drinking and often found himself in trouble. Despite this, his music continued to influence generations of artists. His recordings remain some of the most powerful blues songs ever made. His daughter, Marian Diaz-Riaco, wanted to make sure that people never forgot her father's contributions to music. She started the Little Walter Foundation in Chicago. The foundation works to keep his legacy alive by supporting young artists in music, animation, and video. Even though he passed away young, Little Walter's influence in blues and rock music remains strong. His harmonica skills changed the game forever. Many musicians still look up to him and try to learn from his recordings. His life was full of struggles, but his music lives on. Little Walter will always be remembered as the man who turned the harmonica into something truly special.